At a banquet, for some reason, my husband Tom and my in-laws were ignoring me. The other relatives reacted the same way. Feeling suspicious, I pretended to go to the restroom and secretly observed everyone where they couldn't see me. Then, a horrifying conversation reached my ears. A barren daughter-in-law is an ominous presence indeed. Yes, talking to someone like her makes it feels like a curse might rub off on us, best to avoid her. Hearing these words, I trembled with anger. Unforgivable. To blame infertility on me and, on top of that, to ignore my very existence. It seems I have no choice but to carry out my plan right away. After I stealthily disappeared from the venue, my smartphone vibrated. When I answered the call, it was indeed Tom. What have you done?" He screamed in agony as soon as he spoke. I couldn't help but chuckle. "What are you panicking about? It's the truth, isn't it?" It appeared that Tom was going half mad because of a certain image I had displayed on the screen. But my real counterattack was just beginning. "I'm about to show you hell. My name is Amy, and I'm 35 years old. 9 years ago, at the age of 26, I married my husband Tom. I met Tom, who is 2 years older than me, at a singles party. He was very kind and we clicked right away. When we started dating and began to think about marriage, Tom told me he planned to return to his rural hometown to take up farming. The village, nearing a ghost town, was losing people, and he felt a sense of crisis that it might decline further. I was a bit surprised, but eventually, I decided to follow him, moved by his passionate plea, "Come with me." Like Tom, I also came from the countryside, though from a different area. The truth is, I was tired of living in the unfamiliar city. Fortunately, my brother and his wife live at my parents' house. The fact that I wouldn't need to take care of my parents later also pushed me forward. After that, things moved swiftly, and we got married. I quit my job and came to this small village, Tom's hometown. However, when I say village, it was mostly a gathering of Tom's relatives. We lived in a large house that originally belonged to my in-laws, who moved to a smaller annex on the neighboring property. They were always cheerful and caring, and they always looked out for us. Farming is hard, but living surrounded by nature isn't so bad. Above all, the people of this village are all good folks. When I say this, Tom happily says, it's all thanks to the Watchful One. The Watchful One is a stone statue in the village square, resembling a Buddhist statue. It's not just in the square, there are similar statues all around the village. There are even houses with plush toys modeled after the Watchful One. This village has its unique traditions. All the villagers revere the Watchful One as their literal guardian deity. According to Tom, the Watchful One never overlooks any wrongdoing and does not forgive the wicked. That's why all the people in this village are good, he says. Perhaps every old village has such legends. Thinking this, I didn't pay much attention to it. Life continued peacefully, and I had completely forgotten about such things. But a nightmare was surely drawing closer to me. It was a few years after I had married into the family. I had become quite accustomed to the farming work. Every day, I would wake up early and quickly harvest the vegetables. It was just another ordinary day. However, there was one thing that concerned me. My husband and I hadn't been able to have children yet. I'm about to turn 30. Until now, I thought it would happen naturally, but lately, I've been feeling a bit anxious. This is because, a few years after getting married, more people started asking, "Don't you have kids yet?" Every time, I would brightly respond, "It's something we hope to be blessed with," but in an old farming village, people straightforwardly ask even about delicate matters. Everyone asks the same question. Even my in-laws, and occasionally even the elderly men and women passing by, would bluntly ask, "Why can't you have any?" Each time, I gave vague answers, but it started to become increasingly uncomfortable. It happened one day. After a break in harvesting, I was drinking tea on the porch when my mother-in-law called me. "Hey, Amy, how do you guys take care of marital relations at night?" "What?" Caught off guard by her unexpected question, I almost spit out my tea. "It's strange that you haven't had children after so many years. Are you satisfying Tom?" Her unbelievable words made my eyes widen in shock. Panicking, I said, "What are you talking about? People don't talk about such things normally," and forcefully ended the conversation. Despite that, she continued saying, "It's important, you know," but I ignored her and rushed out of the room. I knew this village had many people with old-fashioned values, but this was beyond reasonable. It was creepy how boldly they asked about marital matters. Having left the house, I decided to kill some time and walk toward the village square. Then, I saw someone. Perhaps a neighbor. I tensed up for a moment, fearing another comment about not having children. But when I saw her face, I felt relieved. It was Sarah, a woman who lives nearby. Sarah smiled shyly. I smiled back. Sarah is the only person in this village who never says anything impolite to me. She is about 10 years younger than me, so she must be around 20 now. Sarah is not originally from this village. After her parents died in an accident, she was taken in by a distant relative, an elderly woman who lives here. This happened just before I moved to the village. After graduating from a nearby high school, she now helps with the elderly woman's orchard. Although we sometimes pass each other on the street, she is quiet and speaks little, so we rarely have a conversation. Sarah doesn't hang out with anyone, so the villagers consider her odd. I too initially thought Sarah, who didn't actively engage with others, was a bit lacking. But now, I am very grateful for Sarah, who never asks intrusive questions. After the unpleasant experience with my mother-in-law, Sarah's presence felt like a purification for my spirit. However, this didn't solve the problem. My mother-in-law, father-in-law, and other distant relatives in the neighborhood kept saying similar things. You need to be more proactive in enticing your husband. You must take the lead with your husband, they would say all they wanted. My mother-in-law then started saying something even more chilling. Last night's dinner was all vegetables, you should add more meat, and maybe some garlic, it might boost Tom's vitality. Why does she even know what we had for dinner yesterday? Her nosiness knows no bounds. Fed up, I decided to discuss everything with Tom. I'm at my limit, everyone keeps asking, when will you have kids? Your mom also pries into our marital life, honestly, it's hard. Tom, who was watching TV, answered without taking his eyes off the screen. What are you talking about? Mom and everyone are just worried about you. Worried, that's prying, don't they say anything to you? Why would they say anything to me? Infertility is a woman's responsibility, isn't it? What? Tom's casually outrageous statement shocked me. Was his knowledge really that outdated? I was just dumbfounded. Infertility isn't always the woman's fault, sometimes it's a compatibility issue, and sometimes it's due to the man, you know. What, me, no way. Tom looked bewildered. Genuinely baffled. I can understand the older villagers holding outdated values. But I was truly surprised to see Tom, who is relatively young, sharing those views. Anyway, I want children too, I'm thinking about getting fertility treatment, we can't strategize without knowing the cause. I suggested to Tom that we go to the clinic together. But, as expected, Tom reluctantly made excuses. Why does a man have to go to such a place, he complained. But I finally persuaded him with the condition, if it's a hospital a bit away from the village. Later, we went to a hospital in another county and both of us underwent tests. A few weeks later, when we returned to the hospital, the doctor told us a fact. There's no issue with you, Amy, the problem is with your husband, he isn't producing sperm, he has a condition. The moment he heard those words, Tom flew into a rage. What, it can't be my fault, this is ridiculous. Tom suddenly stood up and started yelling, and I was shocked. I had never seen Tom like this before. The doctor, looking perplexed, showed us the paper with the test results. Staring at the paper, Tom fell silent with a grim expression. He must have been deeply shocked. I felt sorry for him and couldn't say anything. That night, I spoke to Tom gently. The doctor said that more detailed tests might reveal the cause. And it could be treatable, right? It's a bit far, but I'll support you. But Tom just kept his head down and didn't respond. He probably never imagined he could be the reason. Feeling sorry for him, I couldn't say anything more and silently left the room. But I soon realized that pitying him was a mistake. As Tom's behavior started to worsen, the harsh reality of his condition seemed to have shredded his pride as a man. Perhaps in an attempt to regain his shattered self-esteem, he became increasingly aggressive. I was usually the target of his frustration. complaining that my farming was too slow, or the food wasn't good enough. He began to find fault over trivial things and his outbursts became more frequent. At first, I kept quiet, thinking he was unable to accept the test results and feeling pity for him. But as his behavior continued, I started to lose my temper as well. Arguments became more frequent in a tit-for-tat manner. As a result, the atmosphere in our home was constantly tense. Naturally, there was no chance for intimacy at night, so having children was out of the question. Moreover, going to the hospital for treatment was absolutely not going to happen. Additionally, the people in the village still believed my infertility was my fault. The situation where I was constantly blamed remained unchanged. I wanted to tell Tom's parents the truth, but Tom would glare at me with icy eyes and say, "Don't tell anyone." I feared what might happen if I told the truth. The mere thought was terrifying, and I couldn't muster the courage to do it. Plus, even if I did speak up, I wasn't sure if they would believe me. After all, everyone's thinking is outdated. The common belief that infertility is always the woman's fault still prevails. That's probably why Tom was so enraged when it was suggested that he was the cause. As this way of life continued, I began to feel that I couldn't endure it any longer. I understand he was shocked, but this is just misplaced anger, and I feel like nothing more than a punching bag. Maybe it's better if we part ways. These thoughts had begun to cross my mind. 6 months had passed, and Tom's sarcasm was still ongoing. By this time, I had firmly decided to divorce him. However, the problem again was the old-fashioned mindset of the village. There's a prevailing attitude that divorce is shameful. I had even heard rumors about a woman who proposed divorce and was subjected to terrible verbal abuse by her husband. Considering this, I doubted they would agree easily. So, I thought about leaving a signed divorce document and fleeing the village. It was a drastic measure, but I was that desperate. I decided to proceed with my preparations secretly, so Tom wouldn't notice. Then, the following month. This day, Tom was supposed to be out of the village for crop shipments. It was the perfect opportunity. But while I was packing my things, the front door opened. "Why are you?" There stood Tom, who was supposed to be out. His eyes were narrowed, and he yelled, "Where are you going?" When I remained silent, Tom glanced at the divorce papers on the desk. "You were trying to divorce me, are you kidding me? If people find out my wife ran away from me, it would be humiliating, don't you dare disgrace me." Just as I expected. After a torrent of abuse, he said, "If you ever think about escaping again, you know what will happen." He glared at me with a sharp look. The plan had failed. I was in despair. Still, I wondered how he found out. I had been so careful to keep my actions secret. Since then, Tom's treatment of me has gotten even worse. Complaining that the cleaning isn't up to par, or saying just seeing my face irritates him. If I dared talk back, it would be awful. "You're the worst kind of woman, running away from her husband, the watchful one sees everything, misdeeds will be revealed." That was Tom's constant refrain. Lately, I've even started to feel a disgust towards the watchful one that the villagers frequently mention. I thought it was just superstition, but could that stone statue really be watching me? It's hard to believe that those trying to escape this village are punished. Yet, the fact that my location and actions were accurately known is true. I have become completely frightened. Gradually, a sense of resignation begins to take hold. Time passed, and I was about to turn 35 soon. One day, Sarah, who lives nearby, came to visit. "It's rare to see you, what's up?" Sarah and I had become somewhat conversational whenever we saw each other. Unlike the villagers who thrived on gossip and looked at people with judgment, Sarah never pried into my affairs and remained the only woman who treated me kindly. "Amy, I have something I really need to say." Sarah's face was unusually serious, and I was taken aback. I invited her inside and served some tea. Then, Sarah looked around nervously. Then, without a word, she gestured for me to come closer. We entered a room that wasn't used much anymore, now serving as a storeroom. "What's going on, what happened?" I asked curiously as I followed her without understanding the reason. "It's safe here," Sarah muttered with relief. Then she began to speak as if a dam had broken. "I can't take it anymore, this village actually." That's when I was told a shocking truth. It was about the true nature of this terrifying village. Months later. Since then, Sarah and I had met secretly several times. After learning about the village, we had been trying to figure out a way to escape from here. The truth Sarah shared was shocking. Hearing such a story made the desire to flee this place even more urgent than before. But we needed to act cautiously. If our plan were discovered, it would be over. It took time, but we finally set a date for our escape. It's this coming Sunday. Once every few years, a banquet in honor of the Watchful One is held where all the village relatives gather. We couldn't miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity when everyone would be in one place. Sarah and I had discussed and done all that needed to be done. Everything was prepared. All that was left was to carry out the plan. The gathering was to be held at night. The venue was the village's only traditional restaurant. The building was old but had quite a large capacity, enough to accommodate most of the villagers. Just like a few years ago, I went there afternoon to help out. My in-laws were there, so I greeted them with a good morning. However, after a brief glance at me, they quickly disappeared somewhere. Perhaps they were busy. Thinking this, I didn't mind and went to help with the food preparation. But not just my in-laws, even other relatives didn't respond to anything I asked. Honestly, it felt like they were ignoring me. Had I done something wrong? Confused, time passed, and it became evening. Eventually, the other relatives and villagers began to arrive. Tom was among them. But his attitude was the same as the others. For some reason, he ignored me. It felt as if I had become a ghost. Confused and increasingly irritated, I decided to pretend to go to the restroom so I could secretly listen to their conversations. Then, a horrifying conversation reached my ears. "Amy still hasn't had any children, has she? At her age, it's probably impossible now. Oh dear, a barren daughter-in-law is such an ominous presence, she must be cursed by the Watchful One." My mother-in-law began talking in a disgusted tone, and Tom, already drunk and flushed, nodded in agreement. "Yes, it feels like talking to someone ominous like her might curse us too. It's best if everyone avoids her." My father-in-law laughed. "Of course, I let all the villagers know last night. I told them that speaking to Amy would bring the Watchful One's curse." He added with a chuckle. Hearing their words, I began to tremble with anger. Unforgivable. It wasn't my fault that we couldn't have children. And to say my very existence is ominous. To decide to ignore me, is that something adults should do? No matter how you look at it, this village is not right. It might be best to execute our plan right away. We were intent on escaping this village. But that alone wasn't enough to ease my feelings. I needed to strike back at them somehow. I couldn't rest until I did. I was resolved. Soon, Sarah appeared at the entrance of the venue. It was perfect timing. Without a word, we nodded to each other. Then, I turned off the lights in the venue. Suddenly, everything went dark, and people's voices could be heard asking, "What happened? Is it a power outage?" In the commotion, Sarah tampered with a computer that was set up in the corner of the venue. Originally, the computer, along with a projector and screen, had been installed for a presentation looking back at the Watchful One and the history of the village. We decided to use it to our advantage. After a while, a certain image appeared on the screen. "What the heck is this?" Tom screamed. My in-laws, other relatives, and the villagers were all abuzz, staring at the screen. "Who did this, Amy? Where is she?" Tom became frantic and started causing a scene, so Sarah and I decided to retreat for the moment. We quietly disappeared from the venue and met up outside. It might have been about 3 minutes after we slipped away, when my phone started vibrating repeatedly. It was a barrage of calls from Tom. "Amy, what have you done?" He screamed in agony as soon as I answered. I chuckled softly. "Why are you panicking? It's the truth, isn't it? It seemed like everyone was under the wrong impression, so I just shared the truth." What was projected on the screen were the medical results from Tom's fertility exam conducted years ago. It was a diagnosis showing Tom's infertility. The large text displayed on the big screen was enough to astonish everyone in the venue. Tom was panicking after having his secret exposed. He seemed incredibly confused, screaming incoherently over and over. He was so noisy that I hung up the phone quickly. My phone kept vibrating afterward, but of course, I ignored it. Sarah, who had been watching the situation, looked at me with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Just as I expected, but we need to push a little harder," I said. The pain I had endured couldn't be settled just like that. Together with Sarah, we went back to the banquet hall. Upon returning, the venue had turned into a scene of absolute pandemonium. "Is this really true, you were infertile? Tom, it can't be." Everyone was confronting Tom. Tom, pale as a ghost, kept sweating and making excuses. "This is a lie, it's Amy's conspiracy." The villagers had believed that our inability to have children was my fault, as a woman. But the truth was different. At the time of the examination, there was nothing wrong with me that could cause infertility. It was Tom's condition that prevented us from having children. Yet, without being told the truth, I was blamed. And for not bearing children, I was scorned as if it were a sin, and my existence was ignored. The numerous verbal abuses made my days miserable. I could not forgive them. Sarah and I entered the noisy venue. "Amy, what are you doing?" Upon spotting me, Tom exploded in anger. "Don't joke around, doing something like this, the guardian deity will curse you, you'll encounter something dreadful." His words made me snap. "What guardian deity? You were just spying on us with cameras, it's creepy." The room fell silent when I said that. Striking a nerve, Tom, his parents, and the villagers turned pale. Yes, the so-called guardian deity was no protective spirit. In fact, surveillance cameras were hidden inside it. Inside the stone statues scattered throughout the village, and even in the guardian deity displayed in our living room. Even the plush toys modeled after it contained them. In a room at the community center, bored elderly people would monitor the actions of outsiders. That's why my attempt to flee was completely exposed. I learned this from Sarah on that day. It happened about 10 years ago. Around the time when Sarah was taken in by the village's elderly woman. Having just lost her parents, Sarah felt lonely. Once, out of longing for her grandmother who went to work, she secretly followed her. The grandmother's destination was the community center. There, she chatted with the elderly while watching the villagers through surveillance cameras. At this moment, Sarah learned the secret passed down in this village about the guardian deity's cameras. Shocked, Sarah felt she finally understood the village's atmosphere. The reason rumors spread so quickly was because of these cameras. Disliking even being talked about casually, she found it excessive to be monitored on the streets and even inside homes. Sarah despised the village's invasive nature towards others' privacy. Thus, she chose not to partake in gossip and lived her life quietly. Consequently, the villagers began to criticize her as an oddity for not joining their circles. Sarah had grown tired of the village but had no relatives and nowhere else to go. So she endured life there. But as she approached her 25th birthday, her grandmother began insisting she have an arranged marriage. "You need to have children soon, or you'll end up infertile like Amy," she was told, and pushed to marry an elderly widower who lived on the outskirts of the village. Sarah naturally refused such unreasonable demands. However, her grandmother began to threaten her with curses from the guardian deity. At her breaking point, Sarah thought I might be able to help her. Having suffered from cruel rumors myself, she approached me with a plan to escape the village together. That day, Sarah didn't talk in the living room and instead moved us to another room because she spotted a guardian deity plushie there. I hadn't paid it any mind. Just thought it was one of the usual plushies you see everywhere in the village. But it had a camera in it, too. Naturally, it must have been installed by Tom. It was meant to watch over me. No wonder my every move seemed transparent. Even when I tried to escape or when my mother-in-law guessed what was for my dinner. They were watching through the camera, of course, they knew everything. The sheer horror made me shiver. Instinctively, I felt staying in this village was dangerous. I agreed with Sarah's suggestion. We had to escape as soon as possible. We made our plans together. But I wondered, is escaping enough? I felt I couldn't be at peace without addressing the old grudges held against me. First, I needed to clear my own name. Then suddenly, "Sarah, did you tell them, traitor?" A fierce shout came from Sarah's foster grandmother. But Sarah stared her down. I'm grateful you took me in when I had no one else. But I can't stand this life anymore. I absolutely refuse to live snooping around, peeking into people's lives, and thriving on gossip and rumors. How could you say such a thing? Exclaimed the grandmother as the villagers started to create a commotion. To silence them, I decided to deliver the final blow. I manipulated the computer and projected a new image onto the screen. Everyone was shocked by the images displayed next. Tom caught in intimate moments with young women from the village. The mother-in-law was secretly adding juice squeezed from a rag into the tea for the village meeting. The father-in-law was seen putting his hands around the shoulders and waist of a married woman. Sarah's grandmother was caught stealing vegetables from someone's garden. Almost every resident was captured in scenes they would find embarrassing if known. Everyone present was speechless. Tom shouted, "When were these taken?" Sarah explained how she managed to capture photos of everyone's most shameful moments. It's impossible that all residents are good people. Knowing the locations of the cameras, they must have committed their questionable acts out of the camera's line of sight. We focused on those blind spots, where neither the statues of the watchful nor the stuffed toys could see. We strategically placed our own small cameras, purchased online, in places convenient for mischief. And sure enough, the misdeeds of the villagers started pouring out. They naturally committed minor wrongdoings in these blind spots. Yet, they all claimed to be good people. Really makes you laugh. We captured decisive moments from the camera footage and exposed them for all to see. An eye for an eye, that was the idea. My privacy had been violated, so I did the same in return. This should show everyone how petty and mean-spirited gossip can be. The villagers fell silent, begrudgingly understanding my point. And you tried to tell me everyone here was a good person? Ridiculous, scum, you all enjoy watching and gossiping about others. Stop mocking us, it's pathetic. I don't want to spend another second in this outdated, privacy-lacking village. I yelled out loud, thrusting the divorce papers in front of Tom. Stunned by the sudden move, he just gaped, unable to respond. The in-laws and villagers were utterly shocked. They never expected me to fight back. Indeed, there were times I almost gave up. But with Sarah as my ally, and a newfound path to fight back, I couldn't just stand by passively any longer. I looked down at them quietly, stunned. "Goodbye, you pitiful people," I said calmly. "Goodbye," echoed Sarah, her gaze filled with disdain as she stared down the residents. Without looking back, we left the banquet hall. Stepping outside, I grabbed the 2 carry-on suitcases we had hidden in the barn. They were packed with everything we needed for our lives ahead. The divorce papers were already left at the house, and all that was left was to take these suitcases and leave the village. But as we walked, I suddenly stopped in my tracks at a certain point. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, puzzled. "I just have to do this," I exclaimed. With that, I grabbed a hoe leaning against a nearby farmhouse. Heading to the square, I swung the hoe with all my might. With a tremendous crash, the statue of the guardian deity was splendidly shattered. Of course, the surveillance camera inside it was also smashed into pieces. "Amy, that was quite the spectacle," Sarah exclaimed with a laugh. "Such things should not be left around." That felt refreshing. Laughing together, we proceeded to destroy all the small guardian deity statues throughout the village. Naturally, we had already thrown away the plush toys inside the house. It's incredible to think how terrifying this concept of the guardian deity originally was. Apparently, these statues were originally created long ago for misbehaving children. The idea that, if you do something bad, the guardian deity will scold you seems to have been quite effective at one time. But times changed, and what was once a lesson for children evolved into a means to punish those the villagers disapproved of. It primarily targeted outsiders like me and those who, like Sarah, refused to conform to the village norms. Initially, it was just a way for people to gather and nitpick at those who didn't fit in. Perhaps just a bit of idle gossip to pass the time. However, as eras shifted, these rumors transformed from mere chatter into a system equipped with surveillance cameras, making it possible to watch over people closely. In this secluded village, the act of watching over others became normalized under the guise of a non-existent superstition called the guardian deity. It's troubling enough that people's privacy was being invaded, but what's even more absurd is the persistence of such archaic beliefs. The negative energy that filled this twisted village seemed to have eventually corroded the hearts of those living there. I firmly believe that humans can be far more terrifying than any curse or superstition. Refusing to look back. We left the outdated and decayed village behind for good. According to the wind of gossip that reached us later, it seems that infighting started in the village after I exposed everyone's misdeeds. The ugly disputes led to a split among the villagers. Communication completely broke down, which even affected their farming. Poor coordination led to frequent mistakes. And a blame game started about whose fault it was. Naturally, the condition of the vegetables worsened, leading to complaints from the agricultural cooperative. The village's produce was no longer acceptable, and consequently, no money was coming in. As a result, almost everyone fell into poverty. As for Tom, he was able to divorce successfully. Concerned whether he would submit the divorce papers I had left at home, I consulted a lawyer after leaving the village. The lawyer intervened and confirmed that Tom had indeed filled out and submitted the divorce papers. It turns out he agreed to the divorce smoothly because he wanted to remarry quickly. His new partner was the woman from the outskirts of the village with whom he had been having an affair. Due to the food shortage affecting the entire village, Tom's household was also struggling to find enough to eat. The woman he remarried ended up leaving him because of this. His parents are also broke and constantly fighting. No matter how dire their situation becomes, I can't find any sympathy for them. I never want to be involved with them again or even remember those times. As for us, we're living peacefully in a new place now. However, it wasn't easy getting here. Sarah has no relatives, and my own parents already have my brother and his wife living with them, so I couldn't impose on them. Even after leaving the village, we had no one to rely on. Before we left the village, Sarah and I secretly planned to find jobs. However, due to the surveillance cameras, we couldn't move around too conspicuously. We held our meetings in a camera-free storage shed and arranged everything on a computer. This process took time, but eventually, through remote interviews, I managed to secure a job. Thanks to my previous experience in office work. Although it was a contract position, I didn't mind. I also found a place to live, a small apartment that didn't require a guarantor. It might be tiny, but it's far better than the environment back in the village. Sarah, having no experience outside of farm work, struggled to find a job, so she decided to live with me in my apartment for a while as she continued her job search. Although it was a contract position, I didn't mind. Shortly after we left the village, Sarah landed an office job, fortunate that her youth and energy made up for her lack of experience. In time, my hard work paid off, and I was promoted to a permanent position, which came with a salary increase. This allowed me to move from the small apartment to a decent-sized condo. Meanwhile, Sarah also gained her independence. She moved into a condo nearby. Of course, I acted as her guarantor. Now, we both have made friends at our workplaces and in our communities, enjoying life every day. Leaving the village truly was the best decision we ever made. There was a time when I lost everything, my husband, my home, and my job. But I would tell my past self that it's possible to start over if you just have the courage. Never give up. The actions you take without losing hope are what help lead you to where you are today.